Yeah. And what I find is that when the leader learns to attune to themselves from that place, because we're so often critical of ourselves, we carry hurts and burdens from
Hmm.
the past that leak into our day to day experience. And so we can often look at ourselves like a project or a problem to solve. And through this work, once you learn to orient towards yourself with presence and care and curiosity, then you naturally start to look at other people and realize, well, wait, if I'm basically a walking, living poem and I belong in this and I'm actually good and there's a lot of beauty and truth that I'm able to express all the time, then that must be true of that person who I could tell is really struggling.
Welcome to The Pivot, where we explore the shifts that open new possibilities for how we see, act, and navigate the world. Right now, so much is changing faster than we can make sense of. It's easy to feel unmoored, caught between an unraveling past and a future that's still, well, taking shape. But there are those who can already see what's emerging, beyond the noise, beyond the confusion. In each episode, I sit down with visionaries, thinkers, practitioners, and pioneers who are not just imagining the future, but actually living it. They're sensing what's next and mapping the way forward. So if you're wondering how to navigate this shifting landscape, how to stay grounded, adapt, and even thrive, you're in the right place. This is not about quick fixes or the 7 steps to be more effective. This is about asking the right questions of yourself, of each other, of life, learning how to make sense of this changing terrain and how to move in it. You don't have to figure it out alone. I've got you covered. This is The Pivot. Welcome. Today's conversation is one I've been genuinely looking forward to. JJ Vega and I met through, well, a shared obsession with AI, but we very quickly discovered that we had a lot more in common than that. A similar training heritage in coaching and other things, a deep love for the invisible, an interest in dynamics that actually drive human behavior, and an appetite for being out at the edges of what's emerging. JJ is a leadership coach. He's based in Berlin. He works at the intersection of inner world and outer impact, how the presence of inner conditions of a leader shapes everything around them. He's also a part of some genuinely pioneering experiments in self-organized community and collective intelligence. You'll hear about the Co-Creation Loft, which operates out of an old chocolate factory in Berlin. That detail alone tells you something about who those people are. What I love about JJ is that he doesn't pretend that consciousness work and business performance are in tension. He holds them together, and he models this in how he lives and how he works. You'll hear it in his words and in his energy. We covered a lot of ground. Emergence, the body as intelligence, edge walkers, what happens when the old templates stop working, and maybe most provocatively, what if desire is actually the new GPS for navigating what's coming? I think you're going to find a lot in here. Let's go. Welcome, JJ. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you too, Dave. I'm so
Yeah.
glad to be here and grateful.
Yeah, I've been excited about this. I've been looking forward to this. I was thinking we actually haven't known each other terribly long. You know, it's been a number of months that we've been connecting through, how would I describe it? A mutual love of things geeky. So I first reached
Yes.
out around AI, and then we quickly discovered we had a lot of intersections to include a shared kind of a heritage around our approach to working with clients.
Yes.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's blossomed well.
Yeah. It's amazing because I was thinking about this earlier today. Like, how do I really know Dave? And I remember our exchanges around AI, but it's funny how fast it feels like we found a kinship, despite the fact we haven't really actually interacted all that much in the
Yeah,
grand scheme of things. But that shared heritage, that background, I think really is a fast point of connection for us.
yeah, yeah. Well, I'm sure people listening are going to get that we're connected.
Yeah,
how
I
would
think
how
so.
would you like to describe yourself or introduce yourself?
That's a big question. So yeah, my name's JJ Vega. I'll just like provide my professional attachment points. I'm a leadership coach, primarily self-employed. I've been working as a coach for several years now. I like to work with people at the intersection of the inner world and how that can influence their leadership, and the organizational world and how organizations are impacted by the presence and inner condition of the leader. So that's really the primary stream of work. I've made the joke multiple times before that they'll be closing me off into the coffin on my deathbed, and I'll still be coaching someone. What one-on-one conversations is just that's my vocation. It's what I love, and so helping people grow, helping people develop and gain more awareness and become more fulfilled and connected to their wholeness, then
Mm,
expressing that through their leadership vocation. So that's like the very quick core. And I'm also involved in a lot of different projects. I have a lot of interest in progressive organizational structures and regenerative business and a whole bunch of other things. I like to be on the frontier of
yeah,
whatever domain I'm in and working with really interesting people doing the new things that will become the normal things in 50 to 100 years.
yeah. Well said. Well, we have some other intersection points then. So I've always been telling people that I'll be an old geezer, one of those greeters at Walmart, and I'll still be doing coaching because I love the questions and the discoveries. Yeah. And we have two other things in common. We're both expats. You're in Berlin, and I'm in outside of Lausanne, Switzerland. So that'll color our movements, I'm sure.
Right. We're Americans in not strange lands. They're beautiful lands, but
Yeah,
we're visitors. We have this identity that's quite rare as people
yeah,
that have chosen another home, but still have that strong connection to the places we came from.
yes, yes. And as you say that, that connects me back to something you talked about earlier. Is the interest of kind of the organization or communities and how people come together. And that's something that's percolating a lot for me, especially in the work that I'm now calling the pivot, like how to not turn away from our skills and talents and wisdom, but how do we augment with the emergent, with the unknown? You know, the maps aren't so useful these days. And
Yes.
I keep discovering over and over again, it's in the relational space
Hmm.
where so much can emerge.
Yeah. Yeah. I was curious when you say the emergent space,
Mm-hmm.
what does that mean to you? Because I think you and I have said the word emergent probably 20 or 30 times since we started talking about
Yeah,
this. And I feel
that's
like
right.
that's kind of a center point of how we engage with a lot of our work. So I'm curious what that is for you.
Yeah. It's quite a lot, actually. You know, first of all, the first thing that comes is the mystery of the unknown. So, can I somehow hold, it's a little bit of a paradox. Can I still hold my perceptions, my experience, my wisdom, my talents, my previous successes light enough so that something new can come through? There's an unfolding quality that I notice over and over again, whether it's a new direction, a new thing to bring into the world, a new technology, or going to new places inside a conversation, a dialogue, and relationship. Because I noticed that if I rely just on kind of a past focused experience as a predictor of what's going to come up, often I'll get what I don't want. So that's an interesting phenomena that we could spend a lot of time on.
Yes.
But also a tightness, like a lack of openness, almost a lack of the humility that I think is needed, that I find myself talking a lot about with my clients that are coming in and have tons of experience. How do they stay open? Before this began, you and I were talking about playing music and learning, and like that whole learning mindset seems to be part of this emergent quality. How about you? How do you hold it? What strikes you with emergent?
Me, emergence is it's like the holy grail for a lot of what I think we crave as human beings, especially in organizations. I think we have this innate drive to bring new things into the world that are novel, and surprising and useful and delightful. And this is, often the aim of so many companies. A lot of my work with leaders is in the technology space. And that's what we hope for. We hope for the thing that we create to be something that the market's never seen before, that people have never seen before, that it's useful, that it's valuable. And if we simply rely on what's come before and only try to build off of that based off of precedent and best practices and all of our stored knowledge, kind of like what you were talking about with how people come to the present moment and the present engagement that they're in, personally or professionally, with all of their background. If we solely rely on that, then it's very hard for something that's genuinely new to come through. And so I think about complexity theory when I think about emergence, and just the idea that we as human beings are really complex systems. We're hard to predict. We don't have these clear cause and effect chains that explain our behavior. As human beings and organizations, those organizations are also complex systems. And so really the interaction between parts of these systems are what allow for those new things to come through. That's like the fuel for emergence, is that relational dynamic between parts. And so I really see my main role, both in my clients and with the organizations I work with, to support removing whatever inhibits that natural emergent of something new. Again, it could be a product or a service. It could be an idea. It could be a video, an article, a relationship, a partnership, just something that's never been seen before, that there has to be open creative space for, kind of like what you were saying. There has to be this attunement to the unknown together. We collectively hold that space, and then something comes through that's surprising and unexpected. And that's it. That's like the holy grail for, I think, human experience and creativity.
Yeah. Yeah. I can even hear, as you're talking about, the excitement in your voice. It's viral, it pulls me in as well. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you relate to emergence in your work with individuals and organizations? Like, how does that show up for you? And I'm thinking a little bit more on the concrete side, because emergence and complexity theory can feel very heady. And, and
Yeah.
I'm finding this year, especially, a real calling to try to build bridges into people's worlds that they can walk across to come to these new territories.
Yeah, so I too enjoy the finding ways to take the kind of the esoteric or the complex and make it operational, really,
Yes.
so you can touch it.
Yeah.
And I think back to my own experience, which I often relate in with my clients, especially leaders, is when I was a leader and did not understand what was happening some of the times. Even as I was climbing the ranks, I remember happy hours where my friends and I would lament. First of all, we would complain, and then we would make blood oaths that we would not do what our bosses are doing. And then we did exactly the same thing. Exactly. Yeah. Even better or worse, as the case may be.
The fate of every single leader is to swear, I'll never be my boss or that one CEO. And then they do that exact thing.
Voila. Right. Exactly.
Yes.
Or maybe even more poignant was, the team configurations would change, and yet people would be doing exactly the same thing as their predecessors in 3 months. So I often will talk about this like the invisible winds of the system, and it's not that you're going to crack that code, but first of all, understand they exist, kind of normalize that. And then what does inform? What tells you what's going on between people? What's the unmentionable? What's not being surfaced? The somatic body experiences sometimes are gateways that I find with leaders, because, we can open up, like, what's your gut saying? And then that allows us to talk about systemic issues, also coming in with an intuition, creativity, like, where does that guidance come from that's new? So that seems to resonate. How about with you? How do you find that you're engaging clients with this?
Yeah. I got so excited when you started mentioning the body and somatics. Probably the center point of my coaching approach. Because, kind of like I was saying before, human beings are complex. And we so often treat ourselves like machines that are easy to diagnose. And if we're having some kind of a challenge or a reoccurring breakdown, we almost approach it like the mechanic approaches the car. Like
Yes.
okay, the car won't start. That's the effect. What's the cause? Where's the point of failure? And in a car, it's pretty simple to just isolate a few components of that system and work backwards and say, ah, yes, it's the starter. Ah, yes, it's the battery. Oh, it's the alternator. It's whatever, right? And then we can fix it and we can repair it. And because I work mostly with technologists, I find that the dominant mindset, the dominant way of looking at problem solving is an engineering mindset. Like
Hmm.
break this big
Mm-hmm.
problem down and apply sort of a Newtonian physics linear thinking orientation of just trying to go step by step by step until you get to a solution. That can be helpful in their like sort of simpler problem sets, even if they're complicated. But when it comes to the mysteries of human behavior, like why do I keep on jumping in and taking up all the space in a meeting, which is like a very alive thing? Because I was working with someone on this a couple of days ago. Uh, the first thing that they'll try to do is diagnose from the top down and
Yes.
think through the problem, try to break themselves down. Well, I think it's because of this. And then this happens and this happens and this happens. And the way I'll try to orient clients in that is, well, you're not a machine, you're a human being. And I guarantee you the first thing you think is the cause of whatever breakdown you're experiencing. It is not the actual root cause. And in fact, it's a complex of causes, different parts of you or aspects of you that are in tension and conflict as you engage the situation.
Mm.
And so coming kind of back to the center point of emergence, how does a new behavior emerge in a situation that's more suitable? How do you go from the type of person that takes up all the space in a meeting, doesn't leave room for other people's ideas, to becoming the one that can literally lean back and
Mm.
just let things unfold, let people come in with their ideas, hold that space, hold that container, and say, I trust that the right thing's going to come through. I don't have to manage and control that. Well, first you have to be the emergent leader who can allow that new behavior to come through you. That's the inner work. And then that bleeds into the team dynamic because now you're not getting in the way. You're holding the space and something new and genuine can come through, whether it's a new process, a new approach, an idea for a feature. There's a million different ways that can take form, but it really all does come down to learning that you're a complex system, learning to approach that system with an orientation of care and curiosity instead of problem solving, fixing, predicting, controlling, managing. And then we could do that with yourself and allow these new behaviors and capacities and insights to emerge that can naturally ripple into the system. And that's the dynamic that I'm really supporting people with.
Yeah, that's an important one. And I think it goes way beyond even just the technical, because I like how you spoke to that engineering kind of gap analysis. What do I throw at it?
Mm,
Even to experiment, even if I feel that I'm more flexible and more open, it's still an experimentation to close that gap and to,
mhm.
and to do it quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. And something I want to throw in there too
Mm,
is that we often believe that we know the best possible outcome in a given situation. And I
yeah.
think the spirit of emergence is kind of like what you opened us with. We actually don't know. There could be something new and surprising that comes through a shared relational space that we couldn't predict. But when we anchor our approaches to problems in that gap analysis mentality, 100% of the time, I think that really stifles the possibility of some new solution coming through that could actually be way better.
Yes. Yes. I suspect, I'm seeing it with my clients. I'm wondering about your experience. I suspect that intellectually people get this pretty quickly, but in terms of in practice, it's a little bit different.
Yeah. Yeah. Intellectually, if you just make the comparison between a human being and a machine, as a way to build a bridge, it lands pretty quick. Like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, no, why would I expect to just understand someone's motivations off of a few behavioral markers and signals, right?
Yes. Yes.
Why would I expect to fix their behavior with this forced top down approach? when human beings naturally resist change, as we should, in the ways that we can naturally protect ourselves. They get it up here, but embodying that in a way that feels safe and that feels like you can actually trust that the right thing's going to come through without you having to manage it in the old ways. That's a very different prospect. And I find that especially with very successful operators, often what made them successful, especially in technical fields, is their ability to problem solve. Right. And so making that transition to holding space for some new thing to come through and looking at it as relational work, that's an identity transition, which means you
Yes.
have to unwind the habit of being the most successful version of yourself you've ever been to become this new version of yourself that is immediately not that good, like not that great at what you're doing. There's a gap and it's going to take time to really pick up the skill and the rhythm and to prioritize relational connection and to do the inner work and let that be a practice. I mean, it's a big transition
It
and it's
is.
definitely doable and it's a beautiful thing when it happens, but I don't think people are quite prepared for what's required to do this well.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, that was starting to formulate a question I had, and that is what are you finding in your ecosystems that, this is quite a destabilizing stage because it is such an identity. How
Yeah.
do you support that? What are you doing? What are you finding that allows it to take the arc that it needs to take, but
Hmm.
that it's in a way that's sustaining, in the practicalities of their environment?
Yeah. I will pull a concrete example anonymously, of course, but there's an individual that I've been working with who is an extremely talented, high performing technician for a long time, worked for some large tech companies, and recently made the jump to people leadership. And our work together to support that transition as he sort of like destabilizes, deconstructs this old version of himself, and then starts to really unfold into this new self
Hmm.
has been sort of a two axis transformational process anchored by what is really a core principle of my work and a part of our shared heritage with Alethea coaching is I already believe he is that leader.
Yes.
I know he's that leader without a single shadow of a doubt. It's just like the Michelangelo
Yep.
statue thing, right? Like he didn't make the sculpture. He just revealed what was already there in the marble. I know for a fact that leader's in there. Now, what are the impediments that are keeping that leader from emerging? That's usually the psychological structure that's oriented around that old habit of self, the one that, when faced with a challenge, reaches for the problem solving schools, the tools, the one that looks for technical execution excellence as a mark of success instead of other people's success being a marker of that leader's success. So there's a vertical dimension of learning to make contact with those parts of our psychological structure and to support them making the transition, to support that evolution into something new. And the somatics thing really comes in. You mentioned how
Hmm.
destabilizing this is. Well, going to the body and literally creating stability through the shape of the body, through breath work, through the ways that we can literally ground by feeling our feet on the ground. Bonus points if it's in nature where you really feel grounded and held. Like we just create circumstances of stability as an anchor for when this destabilization comes, that disorientation of becoming something new that's still unclear and unknown. And then the sort of horizontal axis of that work is looking at the practical skills. A lot of people that are new to people leadership have no idea how to facilitate a one-on-one, how to hold team meetings, how to manage their time, protect their boundaries, think and lead strategically, step back and look at a larger picture and then translate that down to the day to day. And so we start with small wins in those categories based off of active situations. And then we start to build capacities.
Hmm.
So it's internal transformation and then the external transformation. And they'll get the quick feedback of, oh, wait, I was actually better at this skill, this sort of low hanging fruit skill than I thought I was. That one-on-one went great. That team meeting went great. Maybe this isn't as scary as I thought it would be.
Yeah.
And then with the stabilization, the somatic, the inner work, we're creating a transformational process that feels deeply stabilized and grounded and rooted at the same time. And the relationship between myself and that person is key. The trust between us
Mm-hmm.
is what really does the work of allowing them
Mm-hmm.
to make that transition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the coaching world, we would talk about it as a container, right?
Exactly.
But the stance that you take, you said early on, and that's part of our tradition, our approach to coaching that is pretty unique, that the person is whole and beautiful and complete, right? And it's this process of chipping away the marble. I use the same imagery. And that stance I find is perfect for the leadership development as well. So for the leader to take that stance with their people, with
Yes.
their organization is another layer to this that I wanted to acknowledge.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I find is that when the leader learns to attune to themselves from that place, because we're so often critical of ourselves, we carry hurts and burdens from the past that leak into our day to day experience. And so we can often look at ourselves like a project or a problem to solve. And through this work, once you learn to orient towards yourself with presence and care and curiosity, then you naturally start to look at other people and realize, well, wait, if I'm basically a walking, living poem and I belong in this and I'm actually good and there's a lot of beauty and truth that I'm able to express all the time, then that must be true of that person who I could tell is really struggling. And now I wonder how I can create the conditions for them to thrive. And then I can fractal that up to the organization. What does this organization need in terms of conditions to thrive? And now you're a gardener or a steward almost as a leader
Mm.
instead of a mechanic, engineer, architect trying to create the perfect little growth machine that'll, outlast the rest of the competition in the market. That'll come, but from a
Yeah,
fundamentally different orientation towards growth.
that's right. And as you're describing it, I can sense into my own experiences with clients where there's an acceleration, with that discovery of themselves and then in others. There's a thawing or a melting away of the rigid holding of people, the
Mm,
judgmental stances. And then what I notice is there's more space. And that process you were describing earlier of that transition period, that vulnerable, awkward period, it starts to accelerate. There's a few
mhm.
wins, there's a few new ahas. And then, like you said, a low hanging fruit where I'm actually better at this than I thought. Then there's a multiplier effect I find that
Mhm.
accelerates the whole process.
Yeah. And I find that that's also true for then the system that leader's embedded within.
Indeed.
They sort of become the like field multiplier that raises, I'll use a baseball metaphor, like
Hmm.
raising the batting average of the rest of the team just through how they're being in that space. And I know when we say things like being, that can sound very fluffy, but like the evidence kind of speaks for itself. When you come from a place of openness and trust and care, people feel that we're relational creatures. We automatically attune to whatever like that highest vibration human being is. And then that enables unlocks for other people that just wouldn't have been possible before if that one person hadn't been
That's right.
willing to unlock it for themselves.
Yeah, what comes as I listen to you is almost a hunger for it, I think. And I'm wondering, are you finding in kind of today's climate and environment, so we've got the polycrises going on, the multiple levels of change and disintegration and as part of a process, the
Mm.
emergence of AI, the emergence
Mhm.
of new ways. How's that playing into this? What are you finding from your field?
Well, people in general are way more maxed in terms of their capacity. From a polyvagal theory perspective, if your listeners are familiar with polyvagal theory, a lot of the people that I'm encountering in organizations and in coaching, they're in a sort of functional freeze all the time without
Hmm.
realizing it.
Hmm.
And so, one of the challenging things about being in the middle of these crises, as you say, different crises are experienced by different people as more or less acute. I think in the technology world, AI is kind of the thing that feels like this looming specter that we're not quite sure. Is it marketing hype? Is it really going to replace all these jobs? And what does that mean for me as a person and my skills? And what do I even focus on? So it creates a tremendous amount of stress and, um, yeah, just that state of being always taxed and maxed out. So I think for me, that really lands in two orientations. First, an orientation of care. So often when I start coaching with people, we don't even really get to this delicate inner work, maybe for months, for a while, because we're just focusing on stabilization. Like, what do you need to feel like your perception of time and crisis is cooled and slowed? Because you feel like there are constantly things coming at you and more news events that are just like the worst news events you've ever heard, but it just keeps getting worse and worse. You know,
Mm.
how can we sort of create a container around you that can slow things down and just cool the temperature? But then the other orientation is, how is this an opportunity? You know, because we're in this age where we have all these huge breakdowns and transitions happening, and every transition is a potential threshold to
Yes.
new ways of being, new ways of relating, new ways of creating and working and organizing social systems, new ways of sourcing a sense of identity. And that is scary work, but it's vital work. That's really what I think this transition that we're in is inviting us into. And the personal experience of those transitions is the doorway for individuals. And that allows us to then engage with these collective doorways too after we've crossed our thresholds.
One thing that emerges for me is as I listen to you, this is exactly how a leader could be as well. So your stance as a coach with your client and the deep attunement and respect of the pacing that I noticed that you're taking. You're giving them time in the beginning, what needs to be built, the capacities, the new ways of checking. These are all, I think, incredibly important for the leader to pick up on as well. So this isn't just in the domain of coaching. It really
Yeah.
is leading organizations or even a leader in your own life, like how to navigate and how to relate.
Yeah.
You were really touching on some key pieces there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting what comes through for me when I heard you say all that is one of the most fundamental elements of human relationship is that we learn together best. Like, and the way we learn together best tends to be I go, you go. I do, you do. And I absorb through your example, the way you navigate different situations, how I can navigate situations that are similar. And so to me, the coaching relationship almost kind of feels like the relationship between the martial artist, who's the teacher, and the martial artist is the student. Of course, that's a false binary to me because I feel like I'm also learning in
Mm,
these conversations, a mutual relationship, but I hold accountability for that space. That's the difference because of the professional quality of it. But I can, you know, my clients are going to see how I engage with them. They'll see how I communicate with them. If they need to reschedule something, they'll see the ways that I navigate that situation when they bring in really sensitive topics and they're worried about confidentiality, especially if their companies are paying the bills. They see how I hold to that, right? And that gives them something to bring with them and to start to embody themselves. And so in that way, our behavior and our ways of being are kind of contagious. You know,
hmm
my assumption is that now that leader brings that embodiment to their context, which then infects, very aware of using that word, but it feels like it's the right one here, goes to another person, it goes to another person. And so to me, the sacred privilege of being a coach is that I've been in leadership for over 20 years. I've made a lot of mistakes and I failed a lot and I've broken down a lot and I've lost a lot. And I've spent years doing the inner work and the training because I just couldn't stop trying to be better. It's almost a sickness at this point. You know, it's who I am. And if I can somehow shorten and accelerate that learning cycle for other people, maybe they don't have to
mm,
go quite through the drama of those breakdowns. And that could mean something, especially if their companies are doing good and important work in the world. That feels like the ripple effect that I'd like to have as a coach.
Yeah. It's quite a multiplier, isn't it? Yeah. And how you described with your examples of the of investment in the relational space, like the modeling of how you would handle the logistics, the relational dynamics, the modeling that you're doing, but it's also feeding into that space, that relational space. So that investment that you're making. And then what I'm sensing is there's a change in the dynamic as a result of it. So it's not just
Mm,
you modeling good behavior in the traditional sense, but there's actually an evolution happening in that container that we were talking about, as well as in the other person. I think that's, we started off talking about emergence. That's another dynamic, isn't it? Of what's involved, what's becoming visible inside a relationship. And
mm,
we just don't go there in our typical day to day, and certainly in the organizational settings and contexts. We are focused on the process, the technology, the KPIs.
yeah.
So when we start talking about leading people, this is where it gets interesting, and I think it builds nicely on the shoulders of the good work around emotional intelligence and things like that. But that was incomplete in a way. There's a there's
Mm,
a there's a evolution to this that as I listen to you, you can really hear we're talking about things that are quite invisible.
yeah. And that is one of the translation challenges here. I was just in Mallorca, Spain, and I was co-living with this guy who's he's like a mechanical engineer who brings quantum physics into his work
Whoa.
of developing materials. Genuinely one of the smartest people I've ever met. And he was an absolute blast to spend time with. I have a deep love for that guy. And we were talking about why quantum physics never really took off the way we thought it would. I know when I first heard about it as a young man in the 90s, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the future. Like, you can change something by observing it. Like, what does that even mean? Yeah, I grew up on Newtonian physics and the three laws and all that stuff and cause and effect. The idea that the universe could be so much more fundamentally strange and relational as something that was an evolution beyond that model was so compelling to me. And then it never took. And I asked him, well, why do you think that is? And he was like, because it's such a leap. It's like a leap in consciousness that the person you have to be to really feel the truth of the primacy of the invisible, or the way that awareness and observation are first effects on the things that we experience. That's such a leap for the human mind, for the human heart. And so a lot of what we're talking about, it makes sense to us. We've been kind of steeped in this stuff for a long time. And I do sense that there's a rising tide of people that are starting to wake up to these dynamics and think about the relational field as a place to invest time in, because it develops trust, because it develops the potential for new things to emerge. But there is still a challenge for people that just, they're not quite there. It's too spooky, it's too weird. It's really challenging to their systems that want a little bit more predictability and certainty and control. And I think that is an edge of this work, is the
Mhm.
people that seem to be really ready for more relationally oriented approaches, like what we learned in Alethea. There almost needs to be a first condition of the consciousness that can really onboard that and say, oh yeah, this makes sense. This resonates with me. This is how I'm already starting to show up in the world naturally. And now there could be some skillfulness and directionality to how I navigate these situations differently.
And I immediately go to actually how you introduced yourself as enjoying being out there, right? Being in the
Mm,
frontiers. And I think that this is another area that I'm discovering to help leaders start valuing are people at the edges. You know,
mm,
we tend to, I know I did, and and even leadership development programs will emphasize, the focus on the middle, the center of gravity of the organization where you need to invest because that's, where all the mass, where the momentum is for change.
yes.
but pay attention to the edges. Pay attention to the person with that unique viewpoint. I remember
Mm,
I had a guy on my team. He was a antique motorcycle renovator. That was his passion. He would get
that's
old
cool.
motorcycles and bring them back. And we were stuck, totally unrelated topic, but we were
Mm,
stuck in an international dilemma that needed a fast resolution. The stakes were high. And
mm,
we were going around and around and around. And what we were doing is we were going to what we had done in the past, right? We were really stuck in that. He came up with an idea, and it came from his work with restoring motorcycles. And
mm,
that was such a, first of all, it was a jolt. It was like we all got shocked in our seats as things started, the implications of it set in.
mhm.
And we got new ideas, and it broke the logjam. There was a fantastic explosion of new ideas that came from that. And I've never forgotten that. And, it'd be easy to write him off as a little eccentric or kind of quirky or the mad professor kind of guy. But, it pays off to pay attention to those folks,
Mhm.
the edge walkers, the people that we might have a tendency to say they're kind of a pain because they slow things down or they ask tough questions.
Yeah.
Make room for them.
Mm. You're reminding me of someone that I used to work with when I was teaching software, also lived in Texas. He was one of the most brilliant marketing strategists and designers I'd ever met. And he was just a quirky guy. And he was also the guy he was like the prophet that's not welcome in his hometown, where he would be the one sounding alarms and asking questions and seeing like 10 years down the road when everyone else was just looking at the next 2 weeks. And that company ended up going under. And I've thought a lot about all the different complex reasons that happened. There were many, but one thing that I could identify was that that guy he really was like a visionary. He was a prophet. He was seeing things. He was sensing dynamics that weren't immediately obvious, and he was pointing us to possibilities that I don't think we were open to at the
Yeah.
time. And I know it's impossible to predict if it would have changed if we had listened, but I am 100% sure that our chances would have been better if we had listened to him, if we had been willing to just pause for a second and question our biases and assumptions
Yes.
about what would work to move things forward and keep the company alive, we would have had a better shot for sure.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, this feels like a very critical piece, and I've been working with it quite a bit in the pivot of, what are the upgrades to your sense making? What are you paying attention to? What's on your dashboard in addition to the numbers? And, we both are enjoying living at the edges, talking to futurists, people that are out there doing innovative things that are already almost living what the new world is going to be emerging that can bring. There's a lot going on out there.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how are you helping your clients and even yourself navigate, identify those edge walkers, the pioneers worth paying attention to, or even in your own ecosystem, like in your client's ecosystem, how to discern, what to pay attention to so that they don't fall guilty to confirmation bias or echo chambers?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think the coaching process and having a reflective dialogue, its very nature is something that opens up doors around blind spots and certain biases. And I would say the main work that I'm helping people do is to look at the deeper emotional roots of their rigidity and assumptions around different people in their organizations. So, someone may have just an example, like a product engineer for a software company may have a team of sales engineers. And, this person's pretty straight and narrow. This person's a little underperforming, but they hit their quota and get the job done. And this person's just kind of out there and they're on their own. And all they want to do is work on like new, interesting features.
Mhm.
That's what they like. They want to be on that feature edge. And if you're someone as a leader, and especially a sales leader who's accountable to other people's quotas, and this is the lifeblood of a company, then your first reaction is going to be, like a visceral, God, no. Just like you looked at the Google sheet, you saw the numbers, you're like, damn,
Yeah, right.
like we can't have that. I need to get, and then of course it's your responsibility to get that person's performance in line. And let me be clear,
Yes.
performance targets are healthy. We're
Yep.
not talking about
That's right.
relationships and sunshine, rainbows, consciousness for its own sake. Like, I'm not interested in sacrificing a high performing company that can do awesome things in the world. I'm just not willing to sacrifice the human foundation that actually makes it possible. But if you're someone that's in those teams, that's leading those teams, you do need to hold people accountable to a real tangible target. Now, that leader might have that reaction, but through a coaching process, we can examine the fearful tendencies, the fearful about their own security, their own survival, what's going to happen to their career, and then open up the possibility that, maybe this person can have an evolution in how they engage with the team. Maybe there's an opportunity for them to do more pioneering feature work, because now you can bring interesting things to other organizations that wouldn't have been present before. And we can find ways to reconfigure the team to still hit the team's goals. So that's like one, I think, very tangible example of, even in your own team, you have an edge walker. They're somewhere there. And it's usually in the signals that they're not performing that there's an opportunity to get curious about, well, then, is this the supportive container? Is there genuinely a skills or behavioral gap? Or is there an opportunity to evolve how we work together so that this person's giftedness can be a gift to our team and therefore our organization?
Yeah, precisely. And what you also brought in, another key element, is being able to leverage polarities. So the I still need to pay attention. We still have a direction. We have we have deliverables. And how do I flex? How do I create space? How do I pay attention to the creative, which will always be a gamble of sorts, won't it? So
Yes.
how do you navigate, and how do you know when you're over indexing at one end of that polarity at the cost of the other? So that's where I think the skill and the art comes in, is
Mm,
moving back and forth. And what you were illuminating is, once that starts happening, is that melting of that rigidity, right? Like, it's got to be either or,
yes.
there's always a forced choice, and there's always a casualty in that. It's like, well, what if it is both and how do I begin to flex? And all of a sudden, even as I describe this, I can feel space in me, like breathing
Me too.
differently.
Yeah.
There's more possibility here in this, in even in this conversation.
Yeah. You mentioned the risk factor, like when you're placing bets that may not always work out. One of the tragic things that I've seen happening in America recently is the decline of research funding for science, because so much of that work depends on a willingness for a system to tolerate investing in work that might go nowhere. That is science. We're going to chase
Right.
down this thread, and 10 years later, it didn't really turn into much. Maybe we learned some things and gained some things from the process. Of course, nothing is fully wasted, but in terms of that breakthrough, that innovation, maybe not so much. You see that also in companies. Their tolerance for the unknown and uncertainty, and to make those bets, is critical
Yeah.
for any kind of real innovation and the way they work or what they produce and fulfill. But if you have leaders that are still stuck in that rigidity, that can't get out of the either or polarities and learn how to embrace the tensions of opposites or apparent opposites, then you lose that capacity to stay on the straight and narrow with the things you know are working. But let's open up space for the bets, and let's
Yes.
accept a percentage of these bets will work out in a way that we can sort of predict. And some of them will be like the seeds on the side of the road that just never plant. But that's why you throw out a lot of seeds, because some of them will. And that's the future of your organization.
Yeah. That's such an important element. And it applies to the human dynamic too. When I'm going into a new organization, I'm always listening for, how are mistakes tolerated? And what happens when someone screws up? Can I screw up? Can I say no? All those things, truthfully, those for me are the artifacts, the early warning systems, that it's an environment, like you say, that is very committed and dedicated to speed, perfectionism, zero tolerance for error. And, you know, the sustainability question comes in. So it's an interesting, it is, I hear it as a cautionary tale, but it's also, I'm wondering if, because of where we are, if things are accelerating. I think back in the early days of leadership development in my career, a favorite terminology in the 90s was, the whitewater of change. You're navigating whitewater,
Mm,
the rapids. But behind it this was something to solve, to finish. And it also was temporary. Like, things will change. It's right now, it's stormy.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
class 4 rapids, but if you can stay in the boat, you'll be there. You'll be okay.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the case today. I think we're in different rates of change.
Yeah. And boy, I'm so glad you brought this up. That's incredible. The metaphor, especially because I see this on the personal. If I'm working with an individual that's in some kind of a transition, there is a story. And I think in some ways we've all been carrying this story. And I really mean all of us, like human beings for the last however many decades or centuries have been carrying a story. Someday I will. Someday this change will stop and everything will stabilize and it'll just be kind of what it is forever or until I'm dead. Like the one day this will stop. And it really feels like that is melting. That idea that one day will arrive at some point. I mean, for my own life, I had a huge life breakdown 3 years ago. I lost my marriage, was laid off from that company that I mentioned. Um, Found myself sort of location independent for the first time because of the divorce process. And I had a story during that time that I'll get through this and then eventually like the rate of change will just slow down and I'll be stable again. And that has just not happened. In
Yeah.
fact, it's accelerating and it's increasing in complexity. The more my ability to hold that complexity expands. And so there is a cool thing that happens where life is constantly interesting and surprising. But I also think if we believe that change is somehow going to just slow down, stop, and it'll all be
Yes,
stable again, I'm not sure that's really the age that we're in right now.
I would agree. And there was something very powerful I found in your story of, all those cataclysmic changes that you were going through concurrently. There's also this, I think, this almost mythic belief that I'm going to get through something and then everything will be okay. So the
Yeah.
hero's journey, which has been hugely informative in my work, in my life, and how we approach things. And I'm wondering if, it's come time for an update. Is there a postmodern hero's journey? And maybe it's not hero. It is a journey,
It is.
but this idea of conquering internal demons to then, the opponent or the challenge above, and then calm is restored.
Right.
I think that's a little bit of the Camelot story now.
That's interesting. What comes up for me when you say that is I feel like the hero's journey is still relevant
Hmm.
as a pattern of how the narrative of our lives unfolds. Like it points us to deep
Yes.
archetypical truths. I think the update is more the way we frame it, where the original framing, I think, is very informed by the 2 hour movie. You think about all the best movies we've ever seen in
Yeah,
our lives.
that's
It's
right.
like there is a beginning, there, 5 acts or 3 acts, but the story's going to have a beginning, middle, and end. And then that's really where we leave our hero. And we do like those stories to tie up pretty neatly. We want to see them ride off into the sunset or end up in that perfect relationship or, restore balance to the kingdom. But I think the hero's journey is more of a fractal that just keeps repeating. Like
Yes.
we're always being called into new challenges because what would be the point of all this like new capability that we're unfolding as human beings, this wholeness revealing more wholeness of creativity and wisdom and spontaneous access to all these virtues that we can really gain hold of if we do the work. If we don't take on new, exciting, and interesting challenges that bring us back to another edge, like otherwise, I'm not quite sure that this journey is all that worth having, if there really is that completion point. So I think updating the model to more of this fractal where you've almost like leveled up in a sense. And
Mm-hmm.
now, okay, new journey. I still think about the Star Wars movies and the
Mm-hmm.
newer trilogy. There was this real opportunity to, I don't know, embrace that fractal and say, well, of course, yeah, Luke Skywalker wins at the end of the originals, but now he's in this new situation and there's a new hero's journey. There's something that's being called forth in him that is going to require him to basically go to the underworld of his unconscious and
Yes.
bring back the new
Yes.
fruits that'll be a boon and a regenerative force in his community. That's the whole thing.
Yeah. I really like that. And I have a sense that Joseph Campbell would approve. I
Boy,
feel this loyalty to him.
me too. He was
It was
so
a
important to me in college.
same. I felt a little risky taking on his hero's journey, but I like the way you're speaking to it, the fractal aspect of it, and the ongoing. The other thing that came to mind is we talk about evolution and I think there's a new way to talk about evolution even. So there's, this unfolding that allows for new, not just an automatic linear pattern of development. If we're going to have a new world that seems to be emerging, it's not going back to the old ways, there's a new human that needs to emerge. So we talk about new leaders, but new humans,
Hmm.
new capacities, new capabilities. And I find that's where I get excited. And that's where talking to people like you and others at the edges, at the frontiers that already see something, they're already doing something, the early adapters, that's when I find myself paying more and more attention to.
Yeah. That point you made about the new human being,
Mm,
there's something there for me. I think that more than anything has been the biggest revelation for me over the last 5 years. When you're talking about this idea of like sort of constantly bringing the new into the world. When I was younger, and I think a lot of people listening could probably resonate with this, I inherited this template. And that template was education, career, family, property ownership. There's sort of, especially in the
yeah.
States, there's a list. And really in my first half of life, I was very driven to pursue that. And that was worth doing in that first. It's almost like you build the capacity to live, to take risks, to try new things, to take on projects, to see what you're made of in that work. But I feel like this new human that's emerging is the one that exists beyond these templates, right? Like I no longer have the template of property ownership, marriage, career, this sort of atomic family thing that was so prevalent in the cultural templates. I genuinely have no idea what's even going to happen past tomorrow or what one could hope for. There's a sensed trajectory now or a North Star, like a magnetic pull that keeps me going
Mm-hmm.
forward. And I think these are the new people that are coming through that back to emergence. It's like
Mm-hmm.
they're guided by the emergence of something new and then following that to the next new and then following that to the next new. And that's really exciting to me.
Yeah. Same. And I will hear little snippets out there, the new human blueprint, human 2.0. So there's
Yeah.
other conversations that are percolating out there around this. And I think I like how you talk about it as a template. That arc, I mean, that's exactly what so many of my clients are coming in. Like they've hit all the external signs of success, all the cultural agreements that you've made it. And yet, they're walking the floor at 3 a.m. There's this, I call it the disquiet, like this hum in the background of unease, and
Mm-hmm.
elements are longing for meaning for sure. But also, I think you're touching on something important. As templates, they're starting to disintegrate. The cultural agreements that was the success path, you know, really got obliterated. You could look at COVID, you could look at the financial crisis a number of years ago. All the markers are these are some of the systems of the old. So it makes sense that we're going to have this disquiet or this anxiety or a sense of unease because there isn't a template.
Yeah.
And I can really feel an additional privilege of and a responsibility as a coach or working with people to hold that space as well.
Yes, that's a good point. Just the idea that we're seeing all these cultural agreements disintegrate. And for a lot of people, it's almost like they signed a contract when they were born. Like, this is the deal: to be a happy human, to experience fulfillment and meaning, just do these things. Go to the school, get this job, climb this ladder, have these relationships, have this relationship to the land and home and the ways you own that. And if you do those things, you'll feel the way you want to feel. And excuse me, I think what I'm seeing in a lot of my clients and just in general in society, like in conversations and at events, is there is this growing sense of, I don't think this contract works anymore. And so
Yeah.
what's the new contract? What's the new orientation to being a human being? How do we source meaning and fulfillment? Does it make sense that work's just a transaction for resources, or is there something more that I want to explore here? It's my relationship to location. I mean, I say this as an expat.
Hmm.
I never thought I'd live outside the States the way I do now. You know, just
Hmm.
I had that cultural agreement, that template. And once that disintegrated, it was like, well, why not be somewhere
Yeah.
else? Yeah. So there's invitation in that, but it also can be very disorienting for people
Yes.
to start to ask those questions.
Ah, you're uncovering a nice polarity there, aren't you? So there
Mm,
is the, that there is discomfort, unease, lostness, and possibility, something new. And, as you were saying that, what came alive is something that almost is taboo to talk about in the boardroom or at workplace,
yes.
or even I can even feel it in bringing it in here is, what if the real GPS for the new, now there's no templates, is about pleasure, desire, the
Mm,
spark of desire.
yes.
I was reading something around how that's the spark of creativity and that's where intuition comes in, the creative mode. But I could feel I guess my belief systems and cultural agreements that that's not something you're supposed to pay attention to. A little bit. Maybe it's the wasp in me, the puritanical upbringings. I don't know, but that guilty pleasures, right? But what if that were the GPS? What if that, what excites you? What took you to Berlin? What
Yeah.
is moving you in new directions? There's a desire, there's a spark. And I'm noticing more often than not, one of the first things I need to do with a client is help get that spark lit again. Like, how do they
Yeah.
find that? How do they uncover the pilot light where they can then listen to the spark?
Yeah. Yeah, man. Like that's the whole thing. If we're looking for a new template, it's not a template.
Mm. Yeah,
It's
right.
it's orienting towards signal. So the building that I'm in right now is this old chocolate factory
Hmm.
in Berlin, and it's the home of a collective called the Co-Creation Loft. It's legitimately one of the most amazing communities I've ever had the privilege of being a part of. And it's self-organized, so there's no hierarchical structure. We all co-own the space and we steward it. And it's all, change makers, frontier people, all the folks that it's like if every edge worker came together and decided, hey, we should start a community so we can support each other and even create some new things together and see what comes through. We'd been in this process for a while of really trying to map the identity of who we are to help us orient towards making decisions. Because when it's not one person at the very top of a pyramid just handing down the strategic direction, you have to have a way as a collective to sense make those things. And so we developed this document that we call the compass. And it's sort of this thing that points us in the direction of magnetic north for us, who we really are, what our purpose is. But I think even more deeply, who we desire to be, what lights us
Mm.
up, what gets
Mm.
the energy in the room moving, because people just start to come alive with, yeah, we could create that. We could do that together. We have so many skilled people here that could do this. And it really is possible in a group like this because those individuals don't repress their own spark. They don't
Yes.
repress their own points of desire. They're tuning into that all the time and saying, no, 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 not what should I do? What do I want to do? Who do I want to
Mm.
spend time with? What work do I want to do? Like, what is my deep desire? And I got to tell you, if I can help someone uncover that, that's what like really
Yeah,
brings the new world through, you know? It's like the flower that leans towards the sun. Like we honor these natural impulses and hold space for that. And boy, you can't stop that change. That's the grass coming through the concrete right there.
totally. I'm in. Absolutely. Yeah, I love it. The JJ, that thought occurs to me that we ought to do another episode just on this. I think there's a deep dive we
Boy.
could do on this because it would be, I think, super helpful because it's still new talking about, non-hierarchical, traditional hierarchical
Yeah.
organizations and communities, how to come together, what are the potentials, the lighting of desire, the use of that for GPS. I think we could really do some good movements in there if you're interested. That would be great.
Yeah. I mean, I'm like the worst business owner in the world because I haven't really been plugging my stuff, but like my business, Art of Unfolding, that's 100% what it exists to cultivate conditions for. Groups of people coming together around desire, purpose, spark, relational attunement, the deep integration of the human being and what becomes possible when those people move together as one. And I think all the things we're talking about right now, the attunement to desire, the dismantling and melting of these traditional structures, that's all a part of this picture of what I'm thinking of as like the new blueprint or the new pattern for how people organize together. It's been a deep passion of mine forever. And now it's starting to come to fruition because the time's right.
Yes,
So,
that's great.
so
That's
yeah,
excellent.
I'd love to have even more
Yes.
conversations about this stuff for sure.
It feels important. It's an aspect that's important to me is there's often a confusion around connection coming together, like you're
Mm,
describing, and
yeah.
sameness. So there's a desire for everybody to be the same. I see this in teams. I see this in communities where there's a dampening down of those individual sparks
Hmm.
for the continuity, the homogenization of the group. And I think there's a fundamental, again, this may be a cultural agreement, a fundamental misstep that I'm connecting to you if I'm the same. And
Hmm.
if I don't feel the same, then I'm not connecting. And I think that's a false polarity.
Yeah.
So I think there's much more here that we could tease out that could be useful and possibly generate new ideas too.
Oh, well, wouldn't that be the spirit of emergence that we even came into this conversation
That's
with?
right. We've gone full circle. That's excellent. Listen, before we start to as we start to wrap up, share what you're up to. What would you like to share more on, what your passion is and what's coming up for
Yeah.
you?
Yeah. So, the core of my work really is one-on-one leadership coaching. I do that through the Art of Unfolding, mostly focused on larger technology companies with that work and
Hmm.
leaders that are just in extremely complex and fast-moving environments. I also work with a startup executive coaching agency called Inside Out Leadership that's based out of the United States. And those tend to be more like the 10 to 100 headcount organizations, startups, technology companies, folks doing really interesting work. And again, leadership coaching, mostly senior leaders and executive leaders there. But also, the juice of that work is that we're self organized in the ways
Mm,
that you and I are just talking about. So we're
mm,
also in that collective trying to figure out what is this new pattern. And it's full of people that have already been successful in those traditional hierarchies and are interested in exploring new ways of working together. So that's super meaningful work. It's been a lot of fun. I work with this collective, again, the Co-Creation Loft here in Berlin, Germany. Really, this is a community of practice for individuals like yourself and myself who are on the frontiers of creativity and change making and transformation in all the ways we could take those words. And we support each other's inner work and relational work and just help each other thrive as human beings so we can then bring that out into the
mm.
places that we serve and create a ripple effect. And I recently had the privilege of taking more of a strategic leadership role within the collective, helping guide and support those teams and keep things aligned around purpose. So genuinely one of my favorite things I've ever done professionally. Every single one of these people are just absolutely incredible. So that's really the three main streams of my work. Art of Unfolding is very young. It started really just as my private one-on-one practice for people in transition and then leadership. And now I'm stewarding it to become this full-blown organizational development firm that will support the practice of self-organization, mostly in technology companies. And I have a vision for how those companies that are oriented around spark, desire, purpose, that are enabling of the whole human, that are deeply relational and trusting, can be valuable alternatives to our current extractive technical company norm. I really want to see the end of the Magnificent Seven that currently takes a third of the S&P 500 in the US stock market. And so my hope is to create the resources and practices and support for those companies that are ready to step into that ring to leverage this new complexity that we're in for some real systems change. And that is, that's my heart. That's my labor of love that I'm deep in the messy middle on now.
Fantastic. Well, first of all, congratulations. It's such a joy to see you in your sweet stuff, see you come alive, and it's easy to see. We'll put all this in the show notes for sure. If someone wanted to reach you directly to explore something, what would be the best way?
Yeah, the best way would be to go to my website, artofunfolding.org. I have many ways to connect with me and contact me there. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn. I'm sort of always raging against the algorithm with a lot more poetic posts than it probably likes.
Keep
But
going. I love them.
yeah,
They're great.
no, I like to write from the heart. And yeah, those, my website, if you're curious from the startup ecosystem perspective about the leadership work, Inside Out Leadership, that's leadinsideout.io. So that's our website. You can learn more about mindful leadership coaching there. And if you happen to be listening and you're in Berlin, Germany, and you're vibing with this conversation and leaning in and getting energized, then definitely check us out, co-creation.loft. Just Google us. I'm pretty sure that's the website. Are generally looking out for new members and have events here all the time where people in the Berlin ecosystem can connect and exchange and share. And It's an awesome space to be. So those are the
Come on,
best
it's
ways.
a chocolate factory on top of it.
It is a gorgeous space. Like you walk in here and you could just feel the vibe. It's just
That's
absolutely
great.
magical. Yeah.
I'm definitely coming to visit for sure.
Please do.
Yeah. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this and I'm leaving with an appetite for more. So I think we're going to be doing some more episodes together and explore, but it's really been a pleasure. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for who you are and what you're doing.
Well, the feeling is extremely mutual. It's been a blast. And I really appreciate you inviting me to play a little bit of jazz with you and see where this conversation goes. And can't wait for the next ones.
Great. Thanks. Well, that was one of those conversations where I'm still turning things around for quite a while since we talked, and a few things that are staying with me. The grass through the concrete, that image has been with me. JJ said it almost in passing that when someone is genuinely oriented towards what lights them up, towards their own deep desire, you can't stop that change. It's unstoppable, like grass popping up through concrete. I found that both beautiful, poetic, and true. And this connects me to something I've been sitting with for a while now, that so much of what we call navigation or leadership, or even just living well in uncertain times, it really comes down to, can you hear your own signal? Can you feel the pull of what's actually alive in you, as distinct from the template that you inherited, the expectations you absorbed, or the identity that you built? JJ and I talked about the disintegrating template, the old contract that said, do these things and you'll feel the way you want to feel. Well, a lot of people I work with built their lives on that contract. I sure did for a while. And they're good people. These are accomplished people who are now walking the floor at 3 a.m., wondering why none of it feels like enough. I don't think that's a personal failing. I think that's what the breakdown of a template feels like from the inside. And I also think this is what I hear JJ's pointing towards, that there's an invitation in the disorientation, not a map to follow, but a signal to orient toward. One question I'm sitting with, and I'll leave it with you. What's the pilot lighting you that's been turned down low? Not what should excite you, not what used to. Right now, what has the pull on you? Let that be the question that works you for a bit. More soon. And if you like the podcast, please subscribe and include a rating. These reviews make a difference. And if you know anyone who might benefit from understanding the times we're in and the need for the pivot, please forward it to them. As always, thank you for tuning in to The Pivot, where we meet at the edges, we explore the in-between, and we stay with what's unfolding. Until next time, keep listening, keep feeling, keep exploring, and keep finding your way. This is Dave Schoof at The Pivot. Go well.